Herkimer County Executive Steve Levy with you on a very cold and snowy day out there on the ground. Hope you're done with your sleigh riding and everything else you had to do on this weekend and could settle back with a hot cup of coffee or hot chocolate and listen into a very exciting show we have for you today. We are in our second show of our series. This is our first live show, so we're going to welcome your calls throughout this show. This 2 hours from 2 to 4 here on Long Island News Radio. We have a topic that is near and dear to my heart today. When you ask me what is the number one issue here on Long Island, I'll tell you the top three: taxes, taxes, and taxes. I recall knocking on doors when I was running for my first election in 1985, and every house I knocked on, whether it was a Democrat, a Republican, an independent, conservative, you name it, if you'd ask them what was the big issue on their mind, it was the fact that taxes were so high, and this is going back to 1985. So now, several decades later, you ask people, it's still the same thing, if not even more compounded. And you have to ask yourself why. Why is it that Long Island has these taxes, these property taxes that are amongst the highest in the nation? Well, there are a bunch of reasons, and we're going to get into that today on this show, which we hope will be insightful, controversial, and most importantly, accessible. That's what this show is all about. It's live. We welcome your calls in the later segments. This first 20-minute segment, I'm going to spout off about my theories as to why taxes are so high here on the island, and we'll then be joined by Assemblyman Michael Fitzpatrick, a true fiscal conservative who has the guts to be preparing what will be the most significant, comprehensive taxpayer relief, mandate relief package we've probably ever seen in New York State. We're going to talk about his different proposals, and then we're going to get some counterbalance on the show here. We're going to have Vic Fusco, our labor lawyer here at the station. He'll be with us in one of the future segments, along with the first vice chair of the Nassau Police Benevolent Association, Pete Patterson. So we welcome all of those gentlemen here today. Most importantly, we're going to welcome you, ladies and gentlemen, to join in the spirit of debate. So let's talk about why are taxes so high here. Well, one of the reasons, of course, is the myriad of governments that we have, the overlapping level of governments here on Long Island, hundreds and hundreds of different fiefdoms, from towns and villages and school districts and library districts and fire districts and school districts. That's a lot of administration, folks, that really adds up over time. The other is public sector costs. And they tend to be much higher here on Long Island. And what is the primary factor leading to high costs in the public sector? Well, you look at any one of these budgets, and 70% of those costs, any executive will tell you, is personnel related. Now, some of those costs are a result of policies that are dictated at the local level. Yet many others are the result of mandates that are foisted down from either the state or federal government. I think you can really narrow it down to about 4 or 5 big mandates that are crushing local governments here in New York State, that are rather unique here to New York State, which makes us one of the highest taxed states in the nation and one of the highest taxed regions. And let's go through them. The first one, which we'll get into a little bit later with our representative from the PBA, is mandatory arbitration. It was 2001. It was my first year as a newly minted New York State Assembly member. There was a vote in the State Assembly to continue mandatory arbitration going forward. What's mandatory arbitration? It's in the Taylor Law going back to the 1960s, which says if there's an impasse between management and the union and certain unions, and it's been predominantly law enforcement unions, you will pick an outside arbitrator and you will be mandated to accept that arbitrator's ruling as to what the salary, benefits, and everything else will be. Well, in 2001, when the vote came to continue mandatory arbitration moving forward, I stood up as the only legislator in that chamber and in the Senate, for that matter. 160 members of the Assembly, that's about 62 members of the Senate. Only one said, no, we should not continue this concept that is making us go broke. Since that time, I believe there's only one individual who stood up and also said no to continuing mandatory arbitration, and that's our guest a little later today, Assemblyman Michael Fitzpatrick. Well, why has mandatory arbitration been such a problem? And I'm sure Pete Patterson and Vic are going to have much different perspectives on this when they come on later. But mandatory arbitration basically abdicates the decision as to what the benefits and wages are going to be to this third party, who is not accountable to the public or the taxpayer. So what happened is there was this wink and a nod between elected officials, executives in particular, and the union, where they say, hey, we'll just punt this over to the arbitrator. Let him be the bad guy. He can give a very big increase. I, as the executive, could say it wasn't my fault. It was the arbitrator's fault. The union is happy. The arbitrator's happy. He gets his money, and they go on. So what had happened is Nassau would get a very big increase. And then Suffolk would come along with their arbitration immediately thereafter. And the arbitrator would not look at what was the ability of the taxpayer to bear this increase. Instead, he'd say, well, what did Nassau just get? Oh, Nassau got a 4% increase. I'll give a 4.5% increase. Then it goes back to Suffolk. Then that's a 5% increase. And the leapfrogging effect really went out of control in the 80s and 90s, to the point where now it's not uncommon to have a $200,000 police officer. For veterans, 6 weeks vacation for a veteran officer. Collecting pay for unused sick and vacation days, where some can leave with $300,000 checks for these unused days upon retirement. Now, who does that? Who gets that in the private sector? 26 sick days off a year on top of the personal days, on top of the 25 X days, which are just days in between the different shifts. Pensions that are based not only upon the last few years of work, but also with the inflated overtime that gets factored in. So you can have some of these pensions that are $100,000, $125,000, $150,000 a year for a civil servant. Then you get into another mandate, the Triborough Amendment. Triborough dates back to, some decisions by courts dating back to the 70s, where Correction Officers Union was trying to keep their automatic step increases after the contract had expired. Now, what's a step increase? A lot of people in the private sector don't know what a step is because you don't get them. A step is an extra automatic increase in salary above the negotiated increase. So if your union negotiates a 3 or 4% increase for you, you get that. Plus, you get another 3-4% in the step for simply surviving another year. So it could be a compounded salary increase of 6, 7, 8% a year, while inflation is 1 or 2%. And that's how you get these structural imbalances. Anyway, Triborough said that when the contract expires, those automatic step increases are going to continue anyway. Now, management in schools and counties and towns said this puts us behind the 8 ball because there's no incentive for the union to negotiate. They could just sit back and say, hey, look, we continue to get our increases anyway. We're not going to give back or make concessions. There's been a call for revoking the Triborough Amendment for decades now. Maybe this will be the year it happens, thanks to the leadership of Assemblyman Fitzpatrick. Then we look at pensions. Pensions are the new Medicaid. Medicaid was breaking the back of local governments back at the early part of the new century. Increases of 10, 15, 17% a year was really putting these local governments on the precipice of disaster. Well, a group of different individuals and organizations got together and got a cap on that Medicaid. It's still a big nut for the state government, but for localities, at least it's been capped. But pensions now, the obligations with pensions are dwarfing that of what Medicaid was a decade ago. Pensions are increasing at astronomical levels. Just for example, in Suffolk County alone, while we were nickel and diming to try and save $50,000 here and $100,000 there, you would get hit with a $45 million increase in your pension cost in 1 year. $45 million. To be followed with another $45 million the next year. It was doubling every 3-4 years. Simply unsustainable. And why is this happening? Well, in New York, we have what's called a defined benefit for public employees, meaning you get into the system, you start paying in a little as yourself as a employee. The employer matches it, but there's a guarantee built into the system so that you will know you're getting at least 7.75% growth in that pension fund every year. Your pension is guaranteed for life at a certain amount. And if the market is not growing at that level, if it's only growing at 1 or 2% during that year, that delta, that gap between the 7.5% and the 1 or 2%, that's made up by who? By you, the taxpayer. That's why it has become so unsustainable. This system is ready to collapse. Where it's been implemented in other places like Detroit, they're going bankrupt. Where you've seen a lot of other cities, San Bernardino, California, Stockton, Pennsylvania, many other places going under in large part because of the pension obligation. One of the big reasons is because the base pay is inflated so much in those last couple of years. An officer might have a base pay of $120,000, but you add in the night differential of another 9%, 11%, it goes up even further. Then you throw in the unlimited overtime. And then that person now leaves with a last year's salary of $225,000 a year, and the pension is based on that salary. So the person can be leaving with a yearly pension of $125,000, $150,000 a year. And that person may be retiring after 20, 25 years in service. So you could be paying that person as a taxpayer for another 40 years of life. Now, that person got on a job maybe at 22, retiring at 42. Now you hire a new person. That guy retires at 42. You're hiring a new person. That guy retires at 42. You're hiring a new person. Taxpayers are now footing the bill for 4 people to pay for that one slot in the police department. And you'll wonder why we're going broke. These things have to change, and it can only change on the state level. And we have Mike Fitzpatrick coming in here a little bit later to show how he's going to try to do that. I have, since leaving public life, have become the executive director of an organization called the Center for Cost-Effective Government based here in Long Island. It's a cadre of about 200 business and community leaders, and our purpose is to try to find efficiency in government. I know a lot of people are saying cost-effective government, it sounds like an oxymoron. Well, maybe so, but it all starts from the grassroots level. And these folks put together these ideas that Mike Fitzpatrick has been talking about for a long time as well. There's a bill in play right now, and hopefully this will be the year where we'll see some changes. Now, there's another thing that we have to start talking about when it comes to the high cost of local government, and that's health care benefits. If you are an employee on some levels of government here on Long Island, you contribute zero to your health care benefits. Now, people in the private sector are scratching their head and saying, how can this be? Who contributes zero? I may be contributing 15, 20, 25% into my health care. Now, it's not the case in all levels of government. The state actually has it pretty close to what the private sector is. If you're a state employee, it could be 15%, 25% for a family. But in a county level, if you're a present employee, you're paying zero. If you're a retiree, you're paying zero. Incoming employees will finally pay up to 15%. But, you know, there are calls around the state for there to be at least a minimum threshold that some type of rational, reasonable amount must be contributed by the employee, and for good reason. If they don't, the system is simply going to collapse, and then you're going to have what you have in Detroit, where pensioners who thought they were safe, who were going to retire and have the good life, are now finding out that it's wiped out. So my theory has always been better to give in a little bit now from all of us within that system to keep it sustainable, to let the taxpayers survive so you don't kill the goose that laid the golden egg. And the other mandate that I wanted to talk about before we bring in some of our guest, is the disability fraud. Here's a stat for you that'll probably blow your mind. Back since 1959 to present day, the number of people who have gone on disability has increased 640%. 640%! That's not a typo. Now, you can't tell me that work conditions have degenerated since that date. In fact, you probably can make the case that work conditions are a lot safer because of the myriad of rules and regulations within the workplace today. Yet, the number of people on these disability programs has skyrocketed. Here's another crazy stat for you. In the last 5 years, more people went on SSD, Social Security Disability, than got jobs. And you're wondering why our economy is in the tank and why it's been so difficult to us to get out of this quicksand. The entitlement society is growing to the extent where we're going to reach a point of no return. So there you have it. If we're going to have any kind of light at the end of the tunnel, you first have to understand what are the factors that are driving these costs. We had some folks on this show last week from the Long Island Progressive Coalition who were trying to make the case that the reason you're having problems on the local level is a lack of revenue. And I strongly differ. It really is spending that has to be brought under control, spending that is spiraling out of control due to decisions that were made on the local level many, many years ago with contracts that are no longer affordable. But more importantly, decisions that were made in both the federal and state levels of government that are now coming home to roost. The Taylor Law, mandatory arbitration, the Triborough Amendment, the liberal nature of getting on disability. I mean, look what just happened with unemployment insurance. And, you know, we had a very brutal recession. And thankfully, people were taken care of during that time. But you had 99 weeks of unemployment. And then when the Fed said, hey, we're going to have to stop this, there was an outcry by some of the entitlement elected officials who said, oh, no, you can't stop it. Well, when does it stop? If 99 weeks is not enough, should it be 3 years, 4 years? Should we just turn unemployment from a stopgap measure to hold you over into another welfare program? There has to be some kind of longer vision that's kept in the minds of these policymakers where they understand that there's only so much money in that pot. And when you start to have more money, more people who are on the cart rather than pushing the cart, then you get stuck in quicksand. And we're getting very, very close to that point in our local government, in our state government, and on the federal level. So we're going to be talking about these issues. We're going to be bringing Mike Fitzpatrick in here on this show. We're going to open up the phones to you as well. We want to hear your point of view. You may disagree with me vehemently. Say, Levy, you don't know what you're talking about. That's great. We want to hear what you have to say. You might say, thankfully, somebody out there saying what I've been saying for a long time, and thankfully, there's going to be a bill now on the state level to finally get it done. I think it's so cool that we're going to have some labor leaders here today because we want to hear that other perspective. And hats off to Pete Patterson, who is a fill-in today because Vic Fusco had somebody else lined up, and that gentleman came under the weather, and Pete's a real trooper for being able to come down here and to mix it up with us a little bit here. So when we have time after that segment, we're going to talk about hopefully a few other issues. Minimum wage, the need for voter identification. How did PSEG, our new utility, do in this latest storm? Maybe we'll talk about the news this week that shootings are up in Suffolk County and try to put a rationale behind that. Maybe we'll want to talk about New York City and its new mayor and a direction that they'll be looking to go in. And we'll want to top it off at the end with our standard part of the program, the best week and worst week. Who, in your opinion, had the best week on Long Island? Who had the worst week? We're going to get into all of that. Just a point that I'll get into here with what I read about with Nassau County. I read an article this week in Newsday that there were political appointees who were getting raises while the union members were required to have their salaries frozen. That, folks, is a problem. It's a problem because if you are going to ask others to toe the line and give in, well, you better start with yourself. And that is a very, very bad message that was sent by the Nassau administration to exempt these folks. I'm sure Vic Fusco and Pete Patterson are going to have a lot to say about that, especially Pete, who's a Nassau County police officer who's had his wages frozen for the last few years because of the NIFA, the Nassau Interim Financial Agency, that really kept Nassau from going under. They've had some real problems due to these unsustainable contracts that they've let over the years and all of the borrowing and the assessment problems that they had. And the only way they avoided bankruptcy in these last few years was by having that wage freeze. Well, George Marlin, a member of the NIFA board, had believed that that was going to be across the board. And yet you had the elected officials there saying, well, we're going to make exemptions for a lot of our political employees. That, folks, is bunk. That should not have happened. That is a wrong message that you're sending to the hardworking people within that labor force who were sacrificing to help the county get along. We're going to talk about that and a lot of other things as we come back to our next segment.
For political correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 103.9 LI News Radio.
Hey, Long Island. Former County Executive Steve Levy here. Welcome back to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy. We have a great show here this afternoon, and remember, it is live. So we are going to welcome your phone calls through 4 o'clock this afternoon, this snowy afternoon. I have with me some great guests. Michael Fitzpatrick, our assemblyman from Smithtown, who I would put in the Taxpayer Hall of Fame. There are just a handful of officials that I have gotten to know over my 26 years in public life, and very few of them had the moxie of this man, a kind of guy who will say, I will put this bill in regardless of what pushback I will get, regardless of the political consequences, because I really believe it's the right thing to do. Very little calculated from this fellow. He is the real deal. He is a taxpayer hero as he is setting out on putting together what might be the most comprehensive taxpayer protection bill that I've ever seen on the state level. And I want to welcome you to the show, Mike. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you, Steve. Great to be here.
You've been working with us at the Center for Cost-Effective Government to compile this bill that will hopefully be placed in front of the desks of your colleagues up in Albany that would make a real impact on local taxes. What really burned me over the last couple of years was the governor came in with a mandate with some high expectations that a lot of these reforms were going to happen. And the first year was a pretty good year from a fiscal perspective. It was just getting the house in order. But the long-term structural changes really weren't made. They punted. They said they did pension reform. They didn't really do pension reform. It was a new tier that simply said, okay, instead of retiring at 62, you retire at 63, and that's just for incoming employees. So for the present employees, it didn't really change much. And then with mandatory arbitration, we thought, the governor's talking the right talk. He's going to put a cap on, a 2% cap, like they did in New Jersey with Governor Christie. Then various special interests got on the panel. They punted. They said, no, we're really not going to do that either. So very little has happened in that regard. But now with your bill, something significant can happen. You want to give us a quick breakdown?
Yeah, thank you, Steve. It's like I said, it's great to be here. You're right. There were great expectations when the governor came in because he said something that echoed across the entire state, and that is that New York State has no future as the tax capital of the nation. Unfortunately, I think the steps he has taken have been baby steps. The problems continue to get worse. The solutions do not go far enough. And I think when you use the term punt, I think when you think of casino gambling, expansion of gambling, that's punting. The tier 6, that was punting. Saying that there's, dealing with the Triborough Amendment is a non-issue or a non-starter. That's punting.
Yeah, by the way,
you
can't get over that. The governor said, I don't care what you people want out there. Mm-hmm. I'm not dealing with the Triborough. It's a dead issue here. How can you have the gall to say that when you have every superintendent of schools in the state crying for this relief, taxpayer organizations crying for this relief, and the governor just says, well, I just don't want to deal with that issue, so don't even bother bringing it up?
Well, it's unfortunate, and I think it reflects his priorities. Clearly, there are some various constituencies that are important to him that do not want to see action in this area. That's the only explanation. When you think about it, he's running for re-election this year, as we all are, but as the chief executive of this state, when you look at the national statistics, he has not moved the needle at all. In terms, we are still at or near the bottom 49th or 50th place in terms of the total tax burden. And in terms of business climate, we are certainly not hospitable to business, regardless of what he says, in my opinion. Setting up tax-free New York, which they now call Startup New York, because the polling showed that calling it tax-free was not was seen as a giveaway. Is a form, in my opinion, of crony capitalism. I did not support the initiative. We'll see if it succeeds, but giving away or allowing, organizations, companies to go tax-free, why not reduce taxes for all companies in New York State, not just a chosen few? And I'll be very curious to see how this works, because when you have state university campuses in or around these campuses, who's going to get chosen? How is this process going to work? And will there be any political influence in some of these decisions?
So you obviously
skeptical.
Think that New York is still very heavily taxed, and the bill you have, you're talking about pension reform, mandatory arbitration reform,
arbitration reform, Triborough Amendment.
You're talking about just eliminating it.
In a perfect world, absolutely. There's no need for, in my opinion, the Triborough Amendment does not encourage organized labor to come to the table. You need to have both sides. There's no incentive. In fact, I'll tell a quick story. One of the school districts in my district, the teachers union representative, basically told the superintendent, we're in no rush to get to the table because we have Triborough.
And Triborough, for those who missed the first segment, is an automatic step increase.
The automatic step
even
increases.
After the contract has expired.
It was $1 million hit. Just the step increases, $1 million hit to that school district's budget. They don't have the money to pay for it without having to raise taxes.
And can you quickly get into your idea for pension reform before I bring our guests in?
Yeah, the pension reform is key. I've been an advocate since day one up there of getting the political class out of the defined benefit system and into a 401k style or defined contribution. But what the bill will propose, quite frankly, is creating or allowing new employees and giving current employees who are not vested the option of going into the SUNY style 401k option or defined contribution option. 70% of the SUNY instructional staff, Steve, opts into the defined contribution option, and it has a very healthy funding level to make it, which is why so many people enjoy doing it. But it does have a solid return. It has performed well for those people who've chosen it, and it is also, very importantly, portable.
And if I could just jump in and explain to the listening public the difference between defined contribution and defined benefit. Most public employees have defined benefit, while the average private sector person out there, if you have a pension, it's defined contribution, where you put in a little bit, your employer puts in a little bit, and it ebbs and flows with the market. So how much you'll have at the end depends on how much it grows. There's no guarantee for you. On the private sector with the defined benefit, that benefit is guaranteed at a certain level. If the market doesn't perform up to it, the taxpayers will make up the difference. And you're looking to change that.
Yes, I think going forward you have to change that. The defined benefit pension is can be very expensive. When you have a market like we had this year with the indices up well over 25%, almost 30%, people look at their 401k and they're very happy. Also, the taxpayers are happy, quite frankly, because the money managers that are hired by the state, the state comptroller, who is the sole trustee of the pension plan, the funds are performing very well. The problem is when we went through the crash of 2008, yes, the market suffered, but there was a tremendous hit to the taxpayer because these contribution percentages, they take a 5-year average, had to be increased, and quite frankly, you didn't have the economy or the ability to support that. The taxpayer took a huge hit.
Mike, I could speak to that firsthand. I was county executive at the time when the crash came around. We were told that we had to make up those losses, those tremendous losses, in a year. How can you expect us to do it? Then they came and said, well, we'll spread it out over several years, but then you have to pay interest on that. You can't pay it all back in 1 year.
Right.
Then if you do pay it out over several years, you're now paying interest on it, and people wonder why their taxes are going up. Again, here we were nickel and diming, saving $50,000 here or $100,000 there from these different programs that were very needed programs, and then wham! $45 million that you have to make up from that loss. It's crazy.
Right. So, well, one of the problems we have at the municipal level is if you were doing this only, it would be bad enough if you were doing it only for the base salary. But the problem is you have some, over the years, practices have developed, using the overtime, for example. It's a wonderful benefit, but it's killing us, allowing the use of overtime. We have to change that over time. If we don't, we are going to continue to see, if we don't make the changes that are proposed, in my opinion, Steve, we are going to continue to see the erosion of our tax base because our cost of living, the cost of government is going to continue to increase. We have, on Long Island, over 901 taxing entities. That's 2 counties, 13 towns, 124, 25 school districts. How many fire districts, water districts, sanitation districts, library districts, and on, all with people in the healthcare system, deeply subsidized, in the pension system. This all costs money. So when people want to know why are our taxes so high, we have an awful lot of government on Long Island and in New York State. And until
my next show is going to be on consolidation, and we're going to talk about that, no doubt. I want to give some equal time to our friends from Labor, and I want to thank them so much. And to the folks out there, in the audience, feel free to call in. We are a live show. So Vic Fusco, you have a radio show that plays here on this great station. And Pete Patterson, what a great guy for coming spur of the moment from the PBA in Nassau County, the number 2 man there under James Carville. You've heard a lot here today, and I'm sure you're chomping at the bit to give your perspective on this. And we respectfully demur to you to give your 2 cents. Where do you think that the two of us are wrong?
Well, I think, first of all, the whole idea of using the public employees as the first point to balance in the budget, when Mike has identified what I think is a bigger problem, is 901 entities, where maybe we have too many public employees altogether working for all these entities doing duplicative services, but as you point out, Steve, that is another program. In terms of the Triborough Amendment, what was left out of the discussion, and I'll let Pete elaborate on it, is why did the Triborough Amendment come in the first place? Well, just look what happened in the city of New York. You had a mayor who refused to negotiate with the unions. Some unions going 3 years without a contract. The idea of the Triborough Amendment is to get people to come to the table, so it cuts both ways, this sword. Mayors or county executives who don't want to come to the table risk not being able to negotiate the steps, as you say, not being able to negotiate changes in the terms of employment because they don't want to sit down and negotiate a contract there are many union leaders who tell you, I've been begging to have a sit-down. So it's not just the UFT guy who says, I'm not in a hurry. Okay, it's also the other side of the coin where the chief executives of these municipalities refuse to sit. They don't want to cut a deal. And look what happened in the city. The mayor sat back and said, I'm not negotiating with any of these people. Let the next guy do it. And then the next guy comes in, he says, oh, by the way, I left you a balanced budget with no money left to negotiate the labor contracts. That's what Triborough is supposed to, arm the labor side against.
But Vic, how do they do it in other states? I mean, we are the anomaly here in New York State.
I don't live in other states,
but
Steve.
the point is, Triborough is something rather unique to New York. If there's another state out there that does it, I don't know it, but it's far and few between. So how does, how does South Carolina and Minnesota and, Iowa negotiate with their employees? They're not striking. They get the job done, and they don't have a Triborough amendment.
Maybe they do strike. Maybe they don't have a Taylor law.
You know what?
I don't
They
know
don't
what
have a
happens in
Taylor law.
Iowa.
Can I, let me just...
Sure. You've been
jump
very
in.
patient. Thank you, Pete.
I think what happens, and over the years, the news media has been very successful, somewhat, in making public employees the enemy. They're distorting the history and the facts of the Triborough, of the pension system, as well as other issues. Most states probably follow the same rules as the Triborough. It's just that it's not glorified in the news media that it's such a bad thing. I'll look at the police world. The so-called steps that Mike was referring to. The steps were put in place, and Steve, you know as well as I do, negotiating contracts with police unions was a good thing for the municipality, not for the unions. When I first started as a police officer, I had 3 steps. Then it went to 5. Now it's at 8. Suffolk counties and a lot of municipalities are now 12. That wasn't a good thing for labor. That was a good thing for the taxpayers and for the municipalities. Then when you hire these police officers under those certain circumstances and conditions of employment, saying, yes, we did spread out the steps, but you will get there eventually, but we needed to give some relief to the taxpayers, then you want to come in when the contract expires after 4 or 5 years and say, you know something, those steps that we promised you that you should have got there, we want to take it away from you. I said, and as far as the other terms and negotiations, when the Triborough, it was put in place, police officers, firefighters, they have to go to work. And we believe in that. We're public service, that's what we do. We have to go to work. We can't strike. We can't take the day off. We have to be there. This is just a set of fair and level playing field. I'm sorry.
You want to chime in, Mike?
No, but
Go ahead.
no one is saying, I'm not saying that steps are unfair or should be eliminated, but they do need to be negotiated. I would disagree
Well, so then
respectfully.
negotiate.
Well,
See, I
would
disagree. I think
respectfully
steps should be
disagree with you, though, Vic,
eliminated.
because Bloomberg, in my opinion, didn't sit back and say, I'm not going to negotiate, let the next guy handle it. He was not willing to put on the table what the unions wanted, and the unions, frankly, didn't want to negotiate. They went out and worked pretty hard for numerous candidates who they knew were going to.
Mike,
they expect a
I've
better
done
deal under new Mayor De
shows
Blasio.
with union leaders saying,
Yeah.
we've been trying to sit down with the Office of Collective Bargaining. They won't talk to us. They won't negotiate. And it's not always we just want what we want, but let's sit down and negotiate. Maybe you give us that, we'll give you this. I mean, you know what collective bargaining is like.
Sure.
Steve knows what it's like.
Sure.
It's tit for tat.
Right.
But I mean, it does work out on the federal level. It works out on all these other levels of government without without Triborough. It works out in the private
given
sector.
up the right to strike in the other states that you're talking about?
But they don't. I mean, look, the federal
You know,
government,
strikes?
federal employees can't strike.
Federal
They don't
employees
have.
can't strike.
They don't have Triborough, and they don't have mandatory arbitration. So why does it have to happen here? And as far as steps, I might be the only guy here, but why is there a step? I never understood this. I know,
We,
Pete,
as
you were
labor,
saying
we
that.
agree with that completely, but unfortunately, the municipality doesn't want people to go right to top salary.
But that's
and
not.
that makes
but
sense.
but why should you have top salary? What there should be is you come in at a certain level, and then as you negotiate the increases, and as you do in the private sector, you come in at a certain level, you negotiate, and then when you get that percentage increase, you get the increase. You don't get that percentage increase and an extra 4% for.
Well, what's the incentive for the executive to negotiate then?
Well, the incentive on any level of government, it's a give and take, and you have to try and strike that delicate balance so that you're going to keep the taxpayers in a position so they don't fall off a cliff, but also, there is always a tendency to want to make the unions, to have peace with the unions, because they can
the
indeed
unions are
support the
taxpayers
opponent
too.
of their choice.
Every public servant is a taxpayer.
Sure.
Let's understand that. So, I mean, the purpose of the steps, as Pete has alluded, was for predictability for the municipality. The cops don't, and other unions who have it, don't particularly love it.
Well, if you wiped out the step, that's one thing, but then why should you have, okay, here's a top pay. You come in.
Well, you've been there 9 years now, and you've been in negotiations for 3 of them, and the raises you would have got are out the window?
No, the raise you get is what is calculated from the negotiation that you come together with as two parties. But I got less than a minute left. Pete, why don't you wrap it up for this segment, because you haven't had enough said this segment.
Yeah, like I said, I just want, I referred to before. I know Mike was talking about that the governor didn't go far enough with the pensions. Incidentally, it was a lot more than that. Now, police officers coming on the job now never contributed into their pensions. Now they're going anywhere from 3 to 6%, which may not sound like a lot, but when you talk about a year give up, plus coupled with the fact that now you see on Long Island that people are starting to contribute to health insurance, the arbitrators are weighing in very heavily on the ability to pay. Despite
that's new employees get another. They're paying going from 3% to 6% in the country.
Correct.
I have to cut off on this segment.
Correct.
We'll catch up with you on the next segment. Remember, live show. Call in, folks, in these next segments. See you in a bit.
If you're looking for political correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 1039 LI News Radio.
Welcome back, folks, to the Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy show. I am former County Executive Steve Levy. We welcome you during this live show to call in at 451-1039. That's 451-1039. We have a very spirited discussion going on right now with Assemblyman Michael Fitzpatrick. From the right and from the left, we have the labor lines anchor here at our station, Vic Fusco, and the first vice president of the Nassau County Police Benevolent Association, Pete Patterson. And Mike Fitzpatrick, you were talking about your comprehensive bill that would help to finally rein in mandates, and it would include things like pension reform and eliminating the Triborough Amendment, which gives automatic step increases, and mandatory arbitration. I got to tell you, you were a brave soul standing up there and saying no to continuing mandatory arbitration. I remember the flack I took for it. Did you get any feedback, pushback on that, being the only elected official on the state level to say no, we should stop mandatory arbitration?
I wouldn't call it flack, Steve. Look, I have a nice relationship with all the labor leaders. I respect them. We disagree. I never raise my voice. We have a disagreement that I like to articulate when I go to the different screenings of the different labor organizations. I said, look, I don't kid myself. I'm not here. I don't expect to get an endorsement, but I want to hear what you have to say, and I believe you need to hear what I have to say. And you have that back and forth, and it's good. It's healthy. It's necessary. I express my reasons. I think they're sound. I do believe in. I don't believe. I believe in less government. I do believe that there should be more market-oriented solutions to our problems. I think that's the only way to solve many of these problems.
Well, mandatory arbitration is that a clause which requires, if there's an impasse between law enforcement and the government, that it go to an arbitrator. And you've had the opinion, and as I have, that these arbitrators have given away the store over the years. And I want to get your thoughts, and then hand it over to our PBA vice president.
Yeah, I think they have. They're, I think, overly friendly toward the unions. I would expect Pete and Vic would disagree, but that's fine. You represent the taxpayer. I represent the taxpayer. There has to be that healthy difference of opinion. I think on the way I look at the job in terms of voting up or down on binding arbitration, or as an executive, look, we represent the taxpayer, the people who pay the bills. We have organized labor. We don't have a pure market now in organized labor because they're able to unionize. Triborough skews that. The Taylor law skews that. But you have to, I think an executive, whether it's a county executive or a supervisor or I as a state legislator, I want to have you have to have a healthy tax base. And if the cost of government rises too high, people will get up and leave. Companies will get up and leave. It's been happening in New York State for a long time. We are about to witness, I think, something that's not good for New York State, but we're going to be surpassed in total population by the state of Florida in the not-too-distant future. Now, we did gain population, but very small, but Florida is growing much more rapidly than we are. The
It's
state
not
of
only
Texas,
the warm weather, it's the fact that there's no state income tax.
there's no state income tax.
lower
There is a
taxes in general.
lower cost of living in states like Florida and Texas and others. We're hurting ourselves by allowing the cost of government to reach a point where, look, people who are the beneficiaries of some of the provisions of these contracts think, life is good. Well, ask the people in Detroit, the public employees of Detroit, how good life is. And what I worry about is the onset of what I'll call the Detroit syndrome on the part of some elected officials and, frankly, some in labor, that we're going to have a situation where these costs get beyond our ability to control. And if we let that happen, shame on the elected officials. The unions are going to do what they have to do, and that is get the most for their members. But it's very hard for county executives, town supervisors, and other elected officials to do that when you have the playing field tilted in their direction through provisions like the Triborough Amendment.
And I found that
And binding
more
arbitration.
elected officials who were supposed to be, as you say, almost like the arbitrators in between the union's needs and the taxpayers, they actually morph into advocates for the union because they want those donations and they want those endorsements, and they do not want the wrath of the union. And
Well, there was a recent article in the New York press, Steve, that a very prominent labor negotiator or arbitrator was an active fundraiser for the new mayor of New York. That sends
which
a
is
message
perfectly
too.
legal and perfectly nothing unethical about it. It's just a question of, do we want that moving forward? And if you folks agree or disagree, call in. It's 451-1039. And we're fortunate we have Pete Patterson, who is number 2 in command of the Nassau PBA. And Pete, I have the utmost respect for men and women of police departments who put their lives on the line. And often people will ask me, well, is a police officer worth that kind of money? And I say, you really can't answer that question, because anybody who puts their life on the line, it's very hard to answer, to say they're not worth something. The other question, though, is can we afford it? Can we afford some of these salaries now going over $200,000 a year for superior officers? Can we afford cash outs of $300,000-$400,000 a year for unused sick and vacation? Can we afford the numerous days off during the course of the year and pensions that, once you count in the overtime, come out at $125,000 a year? How do you respond to that person on the street who comes up to you and says, I love my police officers, Pete, but I can't afford this anymore? What's your counter to that?
Well, like I was saying before, when you ask a question like that, or if the person asks a question like that, it kind of slants it in a way that's saying, it puts you behind the 8 ball, so to speak. But what I will say is this. When a union organization such as a PBA goes into negotiations, we go in good faith, just like every other organization. We do have the binding arbitration to use if we cannot come to an agreement. We prefer to negotiate a contract. The last binding arbitration award we had was fair. As a matter of fact, the news media touted it as very fair to the taxpayers. They claimed that this was a good start for Long Island. And yet, after we did that, after we did get certain raises, we got some benefits, we also made some very real, very deep concessions that everybody liked. But 2 years, 3 years after that award, while we're still in it, everybody's jumping up and saying, well, wait a minute, you're making too much money. It says, you can't call it fair, take the concessions, and then 2 years later say, it's not fair now. So I said, going back with when Mike brought up the issue with the pension system, yes, you could sit there and look and say the percentages for salaries is high. The percentages in salaries into the pension system in the 70s were higher. Even as high as they are, as percentage-wise, they were higher.
You mean the percentage that they get from
Percentage
the
of
total
salary.
pay? Okay.
What the municipalities
But
have
of
to
course,
pay.
the overall absolute amount was much lower. Correct.
Just like my house was much lower back in the 70s. Now my house is a lot more. That being said, during the 90s, everybody stood back and no one said nothing when the municipalities paid nothing into most pension systems. Nothing.
And we
They
could thank
paid
Control McCall for that. The
Well,
boom was happening in the stock market, and they said, well, let's stop the contribution. It did create a problem. You're right.
It creates
you're
a
right.
problem that in 2008, when you have the economic downturn, and like Mike points out, it's very hard to do. It's very hard to turn on the light switch and have to make up that money. Had they been more financially wiser, they wouldn't have had to do that. They would have had the funds to sustain the bad times, because the pension contribution rate is going down, and it's going to
There's
go
no
down.
doubt, and we've had to make up for those losses. We have a call coming in, Rich. Let's see which side of the aisle he's coming down on. Rich from Central Iceland. Are you there, Rich?
Yeah, hi, how you doing?
Hi, Rich. Great. Thanks for joining our show.
You know, my understanding was that the last contract that the Suffolk County Police got was going to pierce the new budget cap that Governor Cuomo put in, and they needed a 60% plus of the legislature to approve it.
Well, I that was a negotiated contract. You're talking about on Suffolk, right?
Yes.
In Suffolk County, what they did, and I don't expect our friends from Nassau, they didn't negotiate Suffolk's contract. What they did is they backloaded that contract. So they came in touting it, we just got some zeros for the first 2 years, but left it for the next guys to really take it on the chin in the long run. What they did is they first came out with a 10-year contract, which is pretty much, not considered the norm. And the reason you don't lock yourself in for 10 years, especially with a no layoff clause, Rich, is that you lose all your leverage. One of the only things you can do when you're dealing with public employees, if they don't come to the table, you could say, well, then I have to lay off people. If you've now given that away, there's even less incentive moving forward for the unions to negotiate. But if you look at it cumulatively, over the course of that 10 years, which was then knocked down to 8 years because of all the flack that came about from it, yes, it did pierce that cap. But that cap, understand, on the state level, only relates to the overall budget. It does not relate to the awards. What Mike Fitzpatrick's bill is going to do would indeed put a 2% cap on mandatory arbitration awards, as Chris Christie did in Jersey. You don't have that now. Any further comments or thoughts, Rich, before we go on?
No, that just, I can't believe that even in light of the cap and all, that they're going to give out these kind of raises, especially when my police line on my property tax bill, which I believe you put in there, shows that I'm like $4,500 just for the police department.
Well, certainly if you look at the general fund taxes for a typical Suffolk County resident are 10 times less than the taxes for the police district, because that's how much the police gobbles up a budget. But I'm sure both Vic and Pete would say it's well worth it. Correct,
I just
guys?
wrote down a bargain, and I resent you using the word gobbles because when we talk about slanting things, that's a slant word, my friend. But
Was that an editorial opinion?
Let me put that in some perspective, and this is personal. And this goes into Nassau. Years ago, I lived in Seaford, and one day I fell through a window, and I'm exhibiting for the radio audience the scar that resulted from it. I was bleeding to death, and a Nassau County police officer at a 7th precinct was there in 2 minutes and saved my life. Now, to me, had that $4,500 been on my bill in Nassau County, I would have doubled it that year. I tell you, you have your life saved by a quick-thinking police officer. It's worth every penny. When you're getting a speeding ticket from a police officer, I don't want to pay a penny of that. So it's all rather relative. When cops give me a ticket, I don't think they're worth anything. I think most people, have that love-hate relationship with the police. You get pulled over for a ticket, you hate every cop you ever met. Cop saves your life, or helps your daughter, or gets your cat out of a tree. They're the best people on earth.
And let's give some further praise to both Nassau and Suffolk police departments. We have one of the safest suburban communities in the entire United States that we live in. They do a great job, and you could always have your nitpickers saying this and that, but The average guy and gal in the police department, they wake up in the morning and say, I'm going out to serve the public. And God bless them, they do a fantastic job. The question is, at what point do we say we've reached beyond the balance?
Well, I think the answer is, at what point does the public say, I don't need any more police services, for example? And you have this in every department. You get your municipality says we can't hire. For whatever the reason, whether it was a civil rights lawsuit restricting the class, whether it was we didn't have the money to hire. So now what happens? You get the older cops retiring, and the guys who are left, they're commanded to do overtime. And as a person who represents police officers, I can tell you, you cannot refuse a lawful command from your commander to come in and do the overtime. And Pete can tell you that. So now these guys are on forced overtime.
But here's the paradox, Vic. You want to know why it's so hard to hire more police officers? Because it costs us an average of $200,000
I don't
per officer.
disagree with that,
if
because
it
you have
costs $125,000 per officer with the pension and benefits, I could put almost twice the number of cops out in the street. It's so expensive.
The question is, what is the public's appetite for police services?
Well, let's
if they need that many cops, well, are they willing to pay for them? Or when they do need the cop, are they willing to pay the overtime?
That's the big
because
question.
They ran out of cops?
Let's hear from Nelson from Miller Place, who's got some 2 cents to chime in with. Nelson, welcome.
Yes. Hey, how you doing? How's everything
Great.
going?
Thank you for joining us.
It's great. Hey, Happy New Year to everybody, and God bless, and hopefully everybody has a prosperous New Year, and everybody stays safe.
Same to you, buddy. What's on your mind, Nelson?
Yeah. Well, I hate to take the conversation in this direction, but, the problem with when you're dealing with civil servant employees is the entitlement attitude, and you're the one paying their salaries with the taxes. You have this red light program going on now, and they have to start an administrative fee to start paying all the people that they had to hire to process these tickets. And the problem is, God bless the cops and everything that they do. They're always at risk. They may never come home. But the problem is the attitude. You see them sitting around. You see them driving. They drive and they're on their cell phones. They don't use blinkers. And if they pull you over, I don't want to say I haven't been pulled over in a while because I don't want to jinx myself. But I see people deal with police officers all the time, and I deal with civil servants all the time at the courts. Their attitudes are just they don't want to work. They're getting paid a ton of money. Like one of the things I do is I go to the courts a lot. The district courts are closed from 1 to 2. You can't do anything at the cashier from 12:30 to 2 o'clock or after 4:30, which tells you they're only working 6 hours a day. You have court officers sitting there who are reading papers on their cell phones because there's nothing for them to do. And where's all this tax money going that these people have all this free time? And then they claim these disabilities and they're starting other companies and we're out playing golf. It's just absurd at this point.
Well, I appreciate your point of view on that, Nelson. I'm going to hand it over to Vic and to Pete. I'll just mention, I'm a hard bargainer. I'm a fiscal conservative. What I found as county executive, it's very hard to paint with one broad brush the entire civil service personnel. I mean, I'd say the vast majority are outstanding. They work hard. They have the right attitude. Again, they want to serve. Listen, you have some bad apples in any union. You have bad apples in elected officials. You have bad apples in the police department. You have bad apples in the media. You have bad apples everywhere. And there is certainly a difference in incentivizing in the private sector as opposed to the public sector, and you can get away with a lot more in the public sector. There's no doubt about that. It's often said that you have to murder someone as a teacher before you're going to be fired. But with that said, and there are some bad apples, I found that most employees are hardworking and dedicated. Then the question is, what can we afford? Do the benefits and the pendulum swing too much to one side as opposed to the other? But they were some fighting words by Nelson there, Vic, and Pete, and you got to have an opportunity to respond.
I think, Nelson, you're wrapping a lot of frustrations into one question. Some of them are valid. But let me ask you a question. That cop I saw last night on the side of the road on the LIE, sitting in the cold, waiting for when the call came for that cop to go help somebody. He was doing nothing, I suppose, sitting out there freezing his butt off. It's often said that police work and fire department work is, long hours of boredom punctuated by minutes of excitement. And I think, you need your cops there to be there when the accident happens, when the robbery happens. as for cops, when they're talking to one another or on the cell phone, in Nassau County, the cops had no choice but to use the cell phones because their radio system was so antiquated. I don't know if that's been improved. Pete can elucidate that a little bit.
Yeah, you know what is what police work too is also. Listen, I obviously am going to defend my cops because I've worked with them in the street, and it's a situation. If you've never been a police officer, you don't really know. You really can't make comments like that when you see the thing. If I'm going back to post and I turn my red lights on to go through my lights to go through the red light to get back to post, you're going to sit there and say, why does he go through the red light? He's not doing anything. Well, I'm going back from the hospital to your area to patrol your area. I want to get back there as fast as I can, obviously safely also. And people don't realize how my members respond to anywhere from 3/4 to 1 million calls a year. They cover 30,000 accidents. They've involved in over 25,000 arrests. In just Nassau County alone, Suffolk County has as equal, if not more, numbers. News, they just did not an editorial, rather, they just did a news story about the gun violence and how many guns are out there. There are more guns out in Nassau and Suffolk than ever before. Our members are getting called to a lot more violent situations. Unfortunately, society has changed. A lot for the better, but sometimes not. Sometimes for the worse, and this is what we're faced with. So,
well, we do have a lot of dedicated men and women in the department. Like I said, they've helped make us one of the safest communities in the entire nation. Mike, in a minute and a half that we have left in this segment, what are your thoughts on these points? And
well, there is what I find interesting. I think what the caller expresses a frustration with is not with the service that our police and fire fighters render and emergency service personnel. It's a different universe. But what I think he's expressing is the frustration that we all have when, say, we go to the Department of Motor Vehicles, and where's the incentive? They don't treat people like customers. Now, it's gotten better, but sometimes you can walk into a municipal office and it looks like, well, why aren't these people hustling, for example? If they worked in a private office where you had to, it's different. When people say we need to run government more like a business, government is not a business. And one of the reasons why it's not is because you have, quite frankly, labor laws that, people do a bad job, you can't just fire them. They have to go through a process.
And there's Mike Bloomberg who said that he could be walking through one of his departments and one of the employees can say, hey, Bloomberg, blank you. And, he'd have a tough time getting rid of this guy because of all the rules and regulations and really ridiculous protections that are in
come get rid of him.
Well, that's a moot point at this juncture. All right, listen, we're going to go into our last segment. Remember, if you want to join us on the calls, it's 451-1039. 451-1039. Join us in our last segment. Be right back.
If you're looking for political correctness, you've come to the wrong place. It's Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy, 103.9 LI News Radio.
Welcome back, folks. This is former County Executive Steve Levy. You are listening to Speak Out Long Island with Steve Levy on this Saturday afternoon. We are live through 4 o'clock. Just a little side note, stay tuned after 4 because you are going to hear from Vic Fusco of Labor Lines, and we're fortunate to have Vic in our studio right now. He's our counterpoint from Labor here today. He's joined as well by Pete Patterson, who is the first Vice President of the Nassau PBA, and my very special guest is Michael Fitzpatrick, the Assemblyman from Nassau County. You all in the audience are welcome to join us on the radio. Call in 451-1039 in this segment.
Steve, we're not special. Pete and I are not special. Just Mike. I want to say something, folks, who may not know, that Steve Levy is also a very accomplished attorney. Maybe people didn't know that. And he's with a very fine law firm, which I think you should actually say the name of the law firm. I know most of the people in the law firm, and I was very excited to see when you joined them. So why don't you give yourself a plug?
Well, thanks. Hey, that's why I bring you along. When I left public service, I joined up with a public interest firm, Campolo, Middleton, McCormick. The best part about it is not only they're fantastic lawyers, but they have their office right on Veterans Highway and Johnson Avenue at MacArthur Airport. And where's our studio here? MacArthur Airport. It's a great commute, folks. So it works out very, very well.
Scott was my mayor for many years.
Well, that's Scott Middleton, the former mayor of Glen Cove. We have Nelson who wants to chime in. If anyone else wants to chime in, it's 451-1031. Nelson's going to talk about police civil service, and then we're going to hand it over to Mike Fitzpatrick, our assemblyman. Nelson.
Yes, how you doing? I called previously before.
Right. You have some feedback after our... Yeah.
I don't want to come across as like I'm bashing police. That's not my intention here. I think the point that I was trying to make is, back in the days, public servant used to be to serve the public. People used to get into that because they wanted to get into that. Now they're getting into it more so for the salary, because the salaries are high, so you're getting a little bit less quality of than what you used to get.
Well, can't you turn that around, Nelson? Hold on. Can't you say that, and I'm a big critic of the salaries. I think they're too high. But with the higher salary, shouldn't you be arguing that you get a higher quality personnel, a person who maybe has a college degree, who would have gone to another field, but instead says, hey, I'm going to become a police officer, a higher intellect?
That never happens, because the people who would do, when the salary wasn't there, did it for passion. I have a son who's in the military. He's been in it for 5 years on 4 tours over in Afghanistan and Iraq.
God bless you. Thank you for the service.
That's him. Thank him. Don't thank me. I didn't do anything. That kid, it would take 3 years for him to make 1 year's salary of a second or third year police officer, and he's been in there for 5 years now. And he does it because he has a passion for it, and he wants to do it for his country, and that's why a lot of these kids do that. They join and they enlist. I'm not, I don't mean to misconstrue this. I'm not saying, my son's better or this or that. What I'm saying is that the quality, America used to be, because people got into things for passion. You hear the theory of, that call must have been made on a Friday. People used to do things for passion because they wanted to.
Well, it's an interesting theory. Interesting theory. We thank you for calling in. I'd like to give you the Vic or Pete a chance to rebut. I'm actually in agreement with you guys, though, on this, that I think the higher salary does bring in a bigger market of people to choose from, and you probably, you're going to get a good quality. And the other thing you have to think about, too, is, not that this is really a factor here, but if your salary is too low, you can have a lot of officers accepting temptation. And if you want to have your officers who are clean, not dealing with bribery and being bought out from anyone out there, you can't be too low. So there has to be some kind of happy median in there. From my perspective, though, the pendulum went from the salaries being too low 30, 40 years ago to now being too high, and I think it should be somewhere in the middle. But why don't you guys respond?
I think the answer is, you look at the Nassau cops and the Suffolk cops, with whom I'm most familiar, and the city cops. In Nassau, we have, I would say, about 5% of the force has law degrees. We have RNs, okay? We have people with master's degrees. We have a very highly educated force. You don't hear a lot about cops violating people's civil rights in Nassau County. That's very minimal on that kind of stuff. When you deal with the police in both Nassau and Suffolk, they're extremely professional. Now, I did take issue with what you said.
By the way, let me just interject there. You read about it happening in Suffolk, and it's all baloney, because when the Justice Department did their big investigation of Hispanics having their civil rights violated, there wasn't one example of one cop that they can point to who did something wrong. So I just want
you want to raise that issue. I just want to say something, Steve. I've known you for a long time, and I thought you received character assassination on that whole issue, and the hit you took was very unfair on that issue, and the hit that our cops took as well. But as you said, it's a minimum of that. And most of our cops when they speak to you, it's like talking to Mike Fitzpatrick. They have that calm, professional demeanor. You want to chime in on that, Pete?
Yeah, when it comes to salaries with police officers, what we're seeing now, I mean, you want to have a well compensated officer because, like you say, you want to have the best of the best. But that being said, when you take the test and become a police officer, you're going to want to do that. I mean, there are certain things that you're going to have to do, certain things that you're going to have to see while you're out on patrol that you're not going to want to do that, or you're not going to want to see that, and you can't put a price tag on it. So when the caller says that the people will take it just for the money or the benefits, I think that's basically untrue. You still have to have the person who will take it maybe to sustain a certain decent benefit, but also they're going to be facing things that the rest of the people don't face. And
Mike,
let me
could
chime in.
I ask you something, Mike? First, sure. I often hear people like Nelson. They're very angry at like the police officer or the employee for having a high salary. I always say, don't blame them, and don't blame the union leaders. The union leaders are doing their job, and God knows I've had my battles with these union leaders. Their job is to maximize salary and benefits. It's the job of the elected officials to be on the other side, to be honest negotiators, and in my opinion, they're not. They're in the tank. They are too quick to be advocates because they want that all-important endorsement. You are a man with what I call chutzpah, a guy with a backbone who stands up, and I commend you for it, and I want to hear your thoughts as to where you're going to go with this legislation.
Well, I think just on the other point, the higher salaries, yes, they are high, and I have my own thoughts on how they've gotten, how they've increased over the years, or some of the pressures that have applied to raise those salaries. But a very good salary expands the pool of applicants. So you're getting that higher quality person, like Vic said, people with MBAs, nurses, people with extra talents and degrees. And if you want to know the true test of the dedication of these people, go back to September 11th, 2001. We lost, 300 or so firefighters, I think almost 25 or 30
and we're still losing
police officers, and we're still losing people who are suffering from the after effects. That's what you sign up for. So they do earn and I think deserve a good salary. The point you're raising, Steve, is elected officials. Yes, look, they are represented. Pete has a job to do, to go out and fight for his members to get the best pay, the best benefits. It's that process, I think, is problematic, though, in that unions are also, they're not just labor organizations. They have evolved today to become, they're also political organizations. And what happens, whether it's CSEA, whether it's NICE at New York State United Teachers, PBAs, they're all organized. These organizations have now become political organizations,
well, Mike,
and they have been for some
corporations
time.
have become political organizations
You're
as well.
You're absolutely right, Vic. I don't disagree with you there. You're absolutely right. So they use that power, that muscle, to kind of lean on, and it can be very subtle, or it can be, look, I've been in elected office 25 years. No one has ever taken my arm and twisted it behind my back to get me to vote for something or against something. But there is, elected officials need money to get elected, to run for office. And some elected officials, are more susceptible to pressures than others. And when you have, how much money is spent, not just by corporations, but also by unions, everyone's now in the game.
But Mike, can I interrupt you?
Yes, please.
The answer to that, of course, always is, well, do we go to public financing now? I don't know a conservative legislator that would go with that.
I've always been in favor.
Okay, well, I know one. But so I don't see in my lifetime that getting through. Mm-hmm. So it's either you go with a system where each side gets X amount of dollars and X amount of TV and radio time, and it's a level playing field, and you take out all the money that's a corrupting influence, or you have to say, well, there's conflicting interests here between corporate interest and governmental interest and labor union interest. And if they're not political, they don't survive. Be they the corporation that gives the $100,000 donation because they want to build a project and they have to have favorable legislators, and they want to get a guy elected because they know that he believes in the project. Not that the man's corrupt, but he believes in that project. And the guy on the other side thinks it's a terrible project, that it's going to change the character of the neighborhood. And they want to put another $100,000 to make sure that guy doesn't get elected. So, that's the nature of the process.
Well, you know what, Vic? I think you've answered my question in a sense that you're putting, whether it's a corporation or a union, I think they're both big business today. That's
And they're both corrupting.
big labor and big corporations, if you will. You're
But
absolutely
the
right,
corporations
and
are much bigger than big labor.
Not
Big
that-
labor's not that big.
Particularly,
you don't campaign
guys,
contributions.
Can I just
Pete, get
But
chime
is it wrong? Is it wrong for labor to weigh in on behalf of their constituents? Not. I'll tell you. Most of the time we weigh in, it has very little to do with salaries or compensation. It's a lot to do with work environments, with safety issues. I'll do a quick hit in Nassau County. We have this thing called minimum manning in the police department. The minimum manning basically says this: that you're required to put so many cars out each particular night. That was done because years ago, that if the cops couldn't make it in, or if you didn't hire enough cops, they would just basically shut the cars off. The unions never ever had any input on how many cars that Nassau County Police needed. Never, ever. It was by the administration.
Then why are you guys fighting? Why are you guys fighting
because,
to change it? As we did in Suffolk, and it's worked out great without it.
Well, I'll tell you why we're fighting it. Because the administration says you need, let's say, 100 cars to patrol Nassau. The union says for the 100 cars, just put a police officer in the car. It's a pretty simple idea. We didn't say it needed 100. They said it needed 100. And quite frankly, they said, and I'm using the number, in Nassau it's probably more like 170. But they said that back in the late 60s, early 70s. And you'd be very difficult to argue that you need less cops on the street now than you did 30 years ago. So the minimum manning was twisted as far as minimum manning only costs a department that's grossly understaffed, which right now Nassau County is. Suffolk County, I cannot comment. But then they turn it over, and we fight for a minimum manning issue, and it's turned into, not for the safety of the residents or the cops, it's turned into a financial thing where we don't push it minimum manning for overtime. We'd rather have a cop there working
Pete,
straight
I
time.
want you back on another show for that one. I would get rid of
Isn't
it.
it great?
We could have it. Because I'm a big, when we got rid of it in Suffolk,
Well,
it was a big help for
but
us
Steve-
financially, and we actually have more coverage. But listen,
I can't agree with
All
that
right,
part.
that's
but
why I
we'll
want
have
you
to
back on
talk about
another show. Last segment of the show. It's called Who Had the Best Week, Who Had the Worst Week. We're going to go around the horn very quickly here. I'm going to give you my two. I think the best week are the folks at PSEG. The new utility that
Local
took over.
1049.
There you go. Listen, it might have been pure luck. It might have been that they're being compared to what happened last year, which was just about the worst storm we've had in memory. Sandy was just, you really can't compare it to what we had. But now 13 inches seem like nothing. But hey, it went off without a hitch. The roads were pretty good. I think locals had learned their lesson, and very little power outages. And again, that might have been pure luck, but they sure come out as the beneficiaries. The worst week I'm going to give to Mayor Bloomberg, who had to sit there and take a pummeling from these radicals who are now part of this new mayor's administration. It looks like in New York City, the inmates are now running the asylum. All of these crazy left-wing professors who I remember in college, who we used to just fluff off as being, they're crazy left-wingers, but they're just in college. They really can't hurt anyone. Now they're running the show in New York City. I'm really scared what's going to happen going forward. But those are my best and worst. Let's go around the horn. Mike, do you have them?
I would say best who had a good week this week was the new Brookhaven Highway Superintendent, Dan LaSquadro. Dan had some good media coverage with the new system he's implementing to cover the town, and I think they performed very well. So he would be my choice for having a good week this week.
You're going to be magnanimous and skip the worst, huh?
I would say, the New York State taxpayer always has a bad week.
On that note, we have a taxpayer calling in. Tom from Melville, in the little time we have remaining. Tom, chime in, please. You're with us, Tom.
Oh, yeah. Hi. How are you doing?
Great, Tom. Thanks so much for joining us today. What's on your mind?
Yeah, just wanted to raise the concern of brain drain on Long Island. My wife is a doctor. I'm an engineer, and we're actually heading down south.
For good? Are you moving?
Yeah, we're moving. Either Alpharetta in Georgia or Charlotte, North Carolina. We'll be gone within a year. And, the primary reason we're doing it is because of the high cost of living. And, I think a lot of that is because of the overpaid civil servants here. And, we're rational, thoughtful people, and we could work anywhere. We're fortunate. We worked hard, went to the right schools, and, we're fortunate to be in the careers that we're in. But it's to the point where we say, why do we want to keep working for other people's retirements, you know?
Listen,
And-
I hear you, and the point you make is something that's echoed by so many throughout this island. It's the long-term stability of the island when you see professionals such as Tom and his wife uprooting and going to greener pastures elsewhere. Good friend of mine is a doctor. He's got a son, 28, 29 years old, recent graduate of law school, was working in a midtown Manhattan law firm, was finding that he was going to struggle with his wife and they're expecting their first child. They weren't going to be able to make it here. They're moving to Carolina. I mean, they'd make it, but they'd struggle. They're going to go to North Carolina and live like kings. The taxes in Nassau, Suffolk, that would have been $12,000, $14,000 a year, they're more like 4 or 5 down in Carolina. They're going to live great. And you know what? A big part of it is the high cost of government, and 70% of that is personnel costs. So, guys, I'm going to give it to our labor friends to have the last word on this, to comment on this, and give us your best and worst of the week.
Civil service for AME or CSEA isn't even making $50,000 a year. So it's not those civil servants. And there's, as we've been talking about, there's a lot of things that go into the cost of living up here. And I think the fact that we demand a lot of civil service is why we have that burden.
Well, we do
demand
get good services.
I know
that's true.
people who went down to North Carolina, South Carolina. They've all come back.
I wouldn't say all. I've seen some come back, but I still see
I've
more
had 3
going than
employees
coming.
go
Rick.
down there for greener pastures. They've come back. So I hope you have greener pastures there, Tom, and you don't have to come back. And your wife as a doctor, wherever she goes, that's great. I have a daughter who's a doctor, so we're on the same page there.
Hey, Vic, give us your best and worst. Yeah.
Well, my worst is my good friend Ed Mangano. I mean, that thing that you raised at the beginning of the show, Steve, of giving the raises to the executive level while holding off all the unions through NYFA, doesn't pass the smell test. Okay,
And it should have been a great week for him. It's his inauguration. He's
should
having
have
a great
been-
time.
It should have been the best week ever. On my plus side, I think kudos goes to Matt Goldapper and John Caracciolo and Vic Canales for launching this radio station. This is fantastic. We're here at the airport, and we're really going to service the Suffolk County community. Pete?
Boy, Vic, you are the ultimate plugger. I got to say, you gave me the chance to plug, and you put in a good plug for Matt. Good show, sir. Good show.
I just want to make a quick comment on that last caller. What we're finding, like over the last 5 or 6 years, like I said before, the news media has been making this economy all about the public employees, all about the public employees. And when you could tell when he referred to why should I pay into his, public employees' pensions. 10 years ago, he would have never had that comment. He might not have been happy with the taxes, but he would have never made that comment. It's coming to the point now where it doesn't really matter how the salaries were there, how they were attained, whether they're fair or not. Because we've found that the last 3 or 4 years NASA's been in a wage freeze, and we've made major concessions in manning and different issues, and it's still not enough. I says, what people, like when Mike talked about with the Tribal Amendment, these were just level playing fields. It wasn't giving away the store. There may have been awards that may appear to that, but it's not. It's level playing field. It's fair to the unions and it's fair to the taxpayers.
Well, you've been a great defender of your union tonight here, Pete, as you are day in and day out. And Vic, I want to thank you as well for your outstanding contribution. I want people to stay tuned for Vic Fusco and Labor Lines right after we depart. He'll be starting at 4 o'clock. We've got a minute left, and I want to give it to our our special guest, Mike Fitzpatrick, who, again, is putting in a very comprehensive bill. Where do we stand with that bill, Mike? What are the chances? What can the folks do out there to help you get this taxpayer relief package through?
Steve, we're putting the finishing touches on the bill. We had a first draft. We had a couple of changes that we're going to make to it through revision, and I'm hopeful that in the next week we will have a final draft and ready to put the bill in, get a number. It'll get referred to a committee. At that point, we will organize an effort to build support around the state. So we're excited about it.
If people
look forward
want
to the discussion that ensues.
If people want to chime in and help on this mandate relief bill that Mike and the Center for Cost-Effective Government are working in conjunction on, you can email us at info@centerforcosteffectivegovernment.org. Or Mike, what's your email?
Fitzpatrick M at assembly.state.ny.us.
Great show, gentlemen. Thank you so much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next week.
It was fun.